Why did the Hyperboreans, extraterrestrial Atlanteans, send AVARIS to Greece? Hyperborea is an area above the North Pole. Many believe that there was an extraterrestrial race there, the Atlanteans that lived there, called Hyperboreans. In the semicircle from the river Don to the mouth of the Danube, dozens of Scythian tribes had developed relations with the Greeks from very early times, even before colonization, from the Mycenaean Age and the early Iron Age to the Proto-Geometric times, that's hence from 1400 BC to 700 BC. We conclude that the visits of the Greeks must have been frequent to these places, even though most of our sources come from mythology. However, despite the charm exerted on the Scythians by Greek culture, and despite the numerous imports of innumerable products of Greek pottery and metalwork, despite the dense commercial relations and continuous contacts with the Greeks of the colonial centers north of the Black Sea, and even despite the creation of a Greco-Scythian population which spoke a mixed Greco-Scythian language already before 450 BC, that's when Herodotus visited Scythia, the Scythian culture did not pass the stage of recording the language. The nation, which possessed the most important sources of gold in the northern part of the world, maintained the prosperous and dynamic character of the nomadic horsemen and remained rigidly attached to its traditions. It's particularly remarkable that throughout the region, the kings, lords, and the ruling class of the barbarian peoples used the Greek language and writing whenever they had to write something. The Greek language, carrier of the ancient Greek culture, political and religious institutions, Greek thought and philosophy, but also the international language of trade and diplomacy, served as the most important link between the inhabitants of the northern countries, and also as a motivation to attract them to visit mainland Greece and Greater Greece. Herodotus tells us that about the offerings of the northern peoples sent to Delos, the island of Delos, for their travels, for their country and their religion. The Delians narrate that the Hyperboreans sent the offerings wrapped in wheat reeds, and that for the first time they sent two daughters, Hyperoche and Laodice, to carry these offerings. When these two daughters died, they were buried inside the sanctuary of Artemis in Delos, and there the daughters and the boys deposited their hair, which they cut when they get married. Also, the Delians tell us that two other daughters earlier, Argi and Opis, came to bring the tribute they had ordered to the goddess Aletheia for the good birth of Letus, and in fact, it's said that the women of Delos invoked the names of these two virgins in a hymn composed in their honor by Olin, who came from Lycia. Olin also composed other old hymns, which are sung in Delos. Herodotus mentions AVARIS, who came riding on an arrow. And they called it an arrow, but actually it was a spaceship or a spacecraft. Now, Hyperboreans, that's what the ancient Greeks from the time of Hesiod and Pindar called the inhabitants of the far north, about whom there are many paradoxical legends, perhaps due to the dark, foggy, and unknown region they inhabited. They were considered very righteous, and it said that they did not eat meat and lived thousands of years, and that they were at constant war with the Griffins, imaginary animals who threatened to seize gold of their country. According to Strabo, the ancient Greeks called the peoples who lived north of the Black Sea and the Isto-Danube the Northerners, the Hyperboreans. It has been the subject of many paradoxical tales. Avaris is said to have been one of the northern priests of Apollo who urged him to visit Greece. According to the Neoplatonists, and especially in the work of On the Pythagorean Life, Iamblichus calls him a Scythian who came from the north, being inexperienced in Greek education, uninitiated, and advanced in age. So he approached Pythagoras to learn Greek philosophy. Pythagoras then, in order to introduce him to the various Pythagorean theorems, did not apply the pedagogical method, but the 5-year silence and other tests, but in a short time he taught him the books On Nature and On the Gods. AVARIS, the text continues, emphasizing and repeating his northern origin, was old and very wise. He had come to Greece and at that time was returning to his homeland, but he wandered and the road brought him to Italy, where he saw Pythagoras and found that there is no other man like him. And he gave Pythagoras a quiver, an arrow, which AVARIS had and had been holding since he left his country. The arrow meaning the spaceship. AVARIS had used this arrow because riding on it, he could pass through all the difficulties he would encounter during his great wanderings, and on this, therefore, he could cross the impassable, hence rivers, lakes, swamps, mountains. Pythagoras says Iamblichus accepted the arrow, the spaceship that is, or the airplane, as something natural, as if he expected it, without at all being surprised or asking him why he gave it to him as a gift, but took AVARIS aside and showed him his thigh, which was gold, giving him a sign that he was not mistaken. Then Pythagoras listed to AVARIS one by one everything that is inside the sanctuary of the sovereign Apollo, and he assured him that everything was exactly so. He also begged him to stay in Italy and teach those he met. So he stayed close to Pythagoras, who briefly taught him physiology, and instead of enoscopy, meaning how to tell omens, with sacrifices, gave him prognostication by numbers, because he believed that this is the most pure way to find out what's happening, and other exercises of the spirit, the most appropriate ones he handed over to AVARIS. Apart from Pythagorean philosophy, AVARIS was also introduced to Orphic philosophy. Orpheus, son of Calliope, whom his mother had initiated into Mount Pangaeon, also taught Pythagoras and taught him that number is the certain essence of the gods, and that through numbers a wonderful prediction of future events is made. In his turn, Pythagoras taught all this to AVARIS, and taught him that instead of divining with blood and slaughter, the surest knowledge is through numbers. Quote, he taught him a perfect knowledge of all the truth, which had been deduced through arithmetical science. End quote. AVARIS, according to legend, was never seen drinking or eating. Once Phalaris, the cruelest of the tyrants of the cities of Great Greece, took AVARIS and Pythagoras prisoner because he saw them conversing, and because AVARIS, instead of admiring the tyrant, admired Pythagoras, and asked him many questions, especially of its sacred nature, as for example, what is the providence of the gods for men, what is the relation of statues, and whether they should be worshipped, and what are the heavenly bodies and those that revolve around the earth, and many others. Pythagoras continued to teach AVARIS that all things depend on and are governed by the power of the god, and that the power of the soul dominates the freedom of the will. And he went on to discuss thoroughly about the perfect energy of reason and mind, about the arrogance of speech, tyranny, chance, injustice, human greed, and concluded that all worldly things are without any value. And then he gave him a divine counsel about the excellent life, and comparing it with the corrupt life. He showed him that diseases and other grievous calamities of the body are the fruits of debauchery. He revealed to him the distinction between those that come from fate and predestination and those that come from the mind. In this way, then, AVARIS was introduced to the Pythagorean philosophy and learned its main doctrines, and he must have been one of the greatest Pythagoreans. The legends and sources do not say whether he returned to the country from where he came down to relay the philosophy he was taught. It would be more likely that he returned and transmitted to them the Pythagorean philosophy, and especially the doctrine of the immortality of the soul, for which the Scythians were known in antiquity. This is by Professor of the University of Athens, Miss Voula Lampropoulou, and I've translated this for you from a Greek article. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.